Dr. Vulture. The dark global organ trade of Dr. Yusuf Sonmez. Imagine waking up in a foreign country, your body cut open, your kidney gone, and the money you were promised never arrives. Now imagine the man accused of orchestrating it all was not a cartel boss, not a gangster, but a respected surgeon, a doctor trusted to save lives. His name was Dr. Yusuf Sonmez, but the media would give him another name, Dr. Vulture. For years, investigators across multiple countries alleged that Sonmez stood at the center of a sprawling black market organ trafficking network that preyed on the poor and desperate. At the center of the scandal was a small private clinic in Kosovo called Medicus. According to prosecutors, wealthy transplant patients paid up to 6 figures for kidneys, while impoverished donors from Turkey, Russia, Kazakhstan, and Moldova were allegedly manipulated, exploited, and discarded. The scandal shocked the world because it exposed something terrifying. There was a hidden international market for human organs, and real doctors were allegedly running it. Tonight, we are diving into one of the darkest medical scandals of the modern era, the rise of Dr. Yusuf Sonmez, the Medicus Clinic scandal, and the horrifying global organ trade that still raises questions today. Part 1. The global demand for organs. To understand how this scandal happened, you first need to understand one brutal reality. There are never enough organs. Across the world, thousands of patients die every year waiting for kidney transplants. For wealthy patients with money and influence, waiting can feel impossible. And where desperation exists, black markets appear. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, illegal organ trafficking networks had already started emerging in parts of Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Investigators say these operations followed a chillingly simple formula. Find poor people desperate for cash, convince them to sell a kidney, fly them to another country, perform the surgery, then charge wealthy recipients enormous amounts of money. The difference between what donors allegedly received and what recipients paid was staggering. According to investigators in the Kosovo case, recipients reportedly paid between €70,000 and €110,000 for kidneys, while donors were often promised a tiny fraction of that amount, and some allegedly never received payment at all. Many donors came from extreme poverty. Some were unemployed. Some carried crushing debt. Others simply wanted to feed their families. And prosecutors claimed one of the doctors operating inside this underground system was Turkish transplant surgeon Yusuf Sonmez. Part 2. Who was Dr. Yusuf Sonmez? Yusuf Sonmez was not an unknown amateur. He was reportedly a highly skilled transplant surgeon from Turkey with years of medical experience. But over time, allegations began to follow him. Media outlets and investigators connected him to suspicious transplant operations long before the Kosovo scandal exploded into international headlines. Some reports claim Turkish authorities had investigated him multiple times dating back to the late 1990s. Journalists described him as a mysterious figure moving through international transplant circles. Eventually, sensational nicknames began appearing in the press. Dr. Frankenstein, Dr. Vulture. The names reflected growing public outrage over accusations that vulnerable people were being used as sources of organs for the wealthy. But despite investigations and allegations, Sonmez continued operating. And according to later court documents in Kosovo, he eventually became deeply connected to the Medicus Clinic in Pristina. Court records alleged that Sonmez signed an employment agreement with Medicus in early 2008 to conduct transplant-related operations. That decision would eventually trigger one of the most infamous organ trafficking scandals in modern Europe. Part 3. The Medicus Clinic. The Medicus Clinic was a private medical facility near Pristina, Kosovo. On the surface, it appeared legitimate, but according to prosecutors, behind closed doors, illegal kidney transplant surgeries were allegedly being performed on foreign donors and international recipients. Investigators later claimed the operation functioned like a carefully coordinated international business. Recruiters allegedly searched for donors in poor communities across countries like Turkey, Russia, Kazakhstan, and Moldova. At the same time, brokers allegedly found wealthy recipients willing to pay enormous sums for fast transplants. The donors and recipients would then be flown into Kosovo. According to prosecutors, some donors were promised as much as 15,000 euros. Recipients, meanwhile, allegedly paid up to 110,000 euros. Authorities later alleged that the clinic lacked proper legal authorization for transplant procedures. Yet surgeries reportedly continued throughout 2008. The operation may have continued much longer, if not for one shocking incident at an airport. Part 4. The Man Who Collapsed at the Airport. In November 2008, a young Turkish man named Yilman Altan reportedly collapsed at Pristina Airport while waiting for a flight home. Airport officials noticed something alarming. He had a fresh surgical wound. Investigators soon discovered that one of his kidneys had been removed. According to reports, Altan later claimed he had undergone surgery at the Medicus clinic after being promised money for his kidney. That collapse triggered a massive investigation. Police raided the clinic. Inside, authorities reportedly found medical records, transplant equipment, financial documents, and evidence tied to international kidney operations. What investigators uncovered shocked Europe. This was not just one illegal surgery. Prosecutors alleged the clinic had performed at least 24 illegal kidney transplants, possibly more. And investigators believed the operation stretched far beyond Kosovo itself. If you are enjoying this deep dive into real-life medical mysteries and international crime cases, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because some of the stories we uncover are stranger and darker than fiction. Part 5. The International Network. As investigators dug deeper, they began uncovering what appeared to be an international trafficking network. According to court filings and media investigations, the alleged operation involved recruiters, brokers, doctors, clinic administrators, and international patients. One figure frequently mentioned alongside Sonmez was Israeli broker Moshe Harel, accused of helping coordinate donors and recipients. The system allegedly worked with terrifying efficiency. Poor donors would travel to Kosovo. Wealthy recipients would arrive separately. Kidneys would be removed and transplanted in rapid succession. One report described donors and recipients lying in adjacent beds before surgery. Investigators later alleged that Sonmez himself performed many of the operations, and Kosovo was not the only country linked to the allegations. Reports later connected Sonmez to suspicious transplant activity in Azerbaijan and elsewhere. The scale of the accusations made international headlines, because this case suggested something deeply disturbing. Illegal organ trafficking was no longer isolated criminal behavior. It appeared capable of operating across borders using real clinics, real doctors, and real medical infrastructure. Part 6. The Trials and Convictions. The Medicus case eventually became historic. According to reports, it marked the first time medical professionals were convicted in connection with organ trafficking charges tied to transplant operations. In 2011, trials began in Kosovo. Several defendants connected to the clinic faced charges including organized crime, human trafficking, and unlawful medical activity. In 2013, multiple individuals were convicted. Court findings described an organized criminal group allegedly built around illegal kidney transplants. But one major problem remained. Dr. Yusuf Sonmez was not in custody. Reports stated that both Sonmez and Moshe Harel were tried in absentia after failing to appear before the court. Interpol notices were reportedly issued. Yet Sonmez remained elusive. Some reports claim Turkey did not extradite him to Kosovo. Over the years, pieces of the case were appealed, retried, and challenged in court. The scandalous reputation never faded, because even after convictions, many people believed the full scale of the network had never been completely exposed. Part 7. The Ethical Nightmare. The Medicus scandal forced the world to confront a horrifying ethical question. What happens when human organs become commodities? Supporters of regulated organ compensation argue that people should have the right to sell a kidney if they choose. Critics argue that poverty destroys true consent. If someone is starving, drowning in debt, desperate to survive, is their choice really voluntary? The allegations surrounding the Medicus clinic highlighted the unequal balance between rich recipients and poor donors. One side had money, the other had desperation, and in the middle were doctors accused of turning human suffering into profit. The scandal also damaged trust in international transplant systems, because people expect surgeons to save lives, not allegedly exploit vulnerable patients. Even today, illegal organ trafficking remains a global concern. The World Health Organization and anti-trafficking groups continue warning about transplant tourism and black market organ networks operating across borders. And cases like Medicus remain powerful reminders of how vulnerable desperate people can become inside underground medical economies. Part 8. Where is Dr. Sonmez now? Over the years, reports about Yusuf Sonmez became increasingly difficult to verify. Some media outlets claimed he moved between countries. Others suggested he remained protected from extradition. What is undeniable is this: his name became permanently linked to one of the world's most infamous organ trafficking scandals. Two supporters. Some allegations were exaggerated by sensational media coverage, but prosecutors and court records painted a much darker picture, one involving organized international exploitation through illegal transplant operations. And even after years of investigations, one unsettling question remains: how many illegal transplants truly occurred beyond the cases investigators managed to uncover? No one knows for certain. The story of Dr. Yusuf Sonmez is more than just a crime story. It is a warning about what can happen when desperation, wealth, medicine, and organized crime collide. The Medicus scandal revealed a hidden underground economy where human organs allegedly became products and vulnerable people became inventory. It also exposed how international crime can hide behind respectable institutions. White lab coats, medical licenses, private clinics. The people involved did not look like movie villains. They looked like professionals. And maybe that is the most disturbing part of all, because some of the darkest crimes in history are not committed in shadows by obvious monsters, but in brightly lit rooms by people society is trained to trust. If you enjoyed this deep dive investigation into true crime, medical conspiracies, and real-world mysteries, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And tell us in the comments, do you think global organ trafficking networks are still operating today? Or was the Medicus scandal only the tip of the iceberg? Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.